everybody, and welcome back to New Majority. I have here with me Tom Barbour. Tom is running for Commonwealth's attorney here in Richmond, Virginia. Tom, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Tom Barbour. I live in Church Hill in Richmond. I'm a trial attorney in the city. I live with my wife, who's a much better trial attorney than I am, and our two daughters. One's about to be 3, one's about to be 1. And before that, I run my own private practice. I do mostly criminal defense, and then I do issues that tend to tie into whether someone comes into the criminal justice system. Like I'm always on the tenant side in landlord-tenant cases. I'm always on the employee side in employment litigation.
Awesome.
I will also prosecute wage theft and things like that. Before that, I was a prosecutor for the city and also a policy advisor on criminal justice reform for the Commonwealth's attorney at the time. And before that, I was a captain in the Marine Corps. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan as a foreign military advisor. Got out after about 6 years and went back to my alma mater at the University of Virginia for a JD and an MBA.
Awesome. And so can you share a little bit about what inspired you to transition from Marine Corps officer and attorney to running for Commonwealth's attorney?
Well, I had the opportunity as a new lawyer back in about 2014, 2015 to come and work in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office doing essentially criminal justice reform advising. So if the CA, the Commonwealth's Attorney at the time, wanted to stand up a new program, I would help him do that. If he wanted to explore new policy around, ending cash bail or whether to prosecute petty larceny third or subsequent as felonies, I would do the research and writing on that and assist in preparing those issues for him. And when I thought really that that's what I was going to be doing, CA at the time took a partnership at McGuire Woods. I did not want to work for the person who was coming in after him. And so I left to start my own private practice and also started a nonprofit, very small nonprofit, funding a single caseworker to connect people in the system to the services that they needed to stay out of it. And through that work, and through my work as a prosecutor and my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, I really started focusing on issues of why are people in the justice system and what accountability can we seek in that system that manages risk, but also sets people up for success to never come back, and that question is really what drives me and my interest in being in public service in this space and creating a Commonwealth's Attorney's Office in the city of Richmond that is laser focused on public safety, keeping people safe in ways that are humane and effective.
Yeah, and I love that. And you just touched a little bit upon criminal justice reform. So for people that don't know what that is, can you tell us what that is?
Sure. I think in a nutshell, it's the idea that we can be doing criminal justice better, and we should be. It's 2025 in America. Granted, we're in this crazy time right now with a crazy president and a crazy movement across the country, including in Virginia, for extreme backwards policies. But the idea essentially is that we can and should be doing better in criminal justice. And my point of view is that what we really need is a public safety system, not a criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is actually focused traditionally and conventionally on punishing people for something they've done. But really what we need to do is look for ways to hold people accountable in that manage violent risk and also reduce recidivism. Much of the crime you see in Richmond or anywhere is actually recidivist crime. It's people who have been in the system before and are cycling back into it. The reason we see them cycling back is because we're not addressing the root cause of why they're coming into the system. And so if you actually want less crime, if you actually want more public safety, you have to engage very seriously with why people are in the system and then address those circumstances.
And I think rehabilitation is really important in trying to address why people are committing these crimes again and again, because I think oftentimes it's just not really talked about why people are committing crimes. It's too much of like a punishment type of system. And at the end of the day, we're all people, we're all
Right.
human, and we should try to approach things
Right.
with a more understanding lens. And so you're currently running. What separates you from the incumbent?
The incumbent is an extremely conventional law and order prosecutor. You know, their conception of criminal justice is that it should be that first system, that you sit in the chair, you wait till the case comes in, you prosecute the case, and you punish the person. And you don't really ask questions around why the crime is happening in the first place or what we can do to prevent it in the future. Your job is to process the cases, prosecute the cases. And I think the fundamental difference between us is that I view the role of the Commonwealth's attorney as being that of the chief public safety officer for the city. If you and prosecutors do stand at effectively the door to the jail with the keys in their hand, I think with that kind of power comes the responsibility to run upstream, run up the road, and try to prevent people from coming into that system in the first place. You have to be a partner to law enforcement, but also to nonprofits and schools and housing initiatives and job initiatives. You have to work to address the actual circumstances, the root causes that bring people into this system, because your goal should be to have less crime, and it should be to keep people safe without using incarceration as a knee-jerk reaction. You know, that should be an outcome reserved only really to manage violent risk, because we can't figure out any other way to do that.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that response.
Mm-hmm.
And so your campaign emphasizes getting smart on safety. Can you tell us exactly what that means with ensuring community safety?
I think it means that you want to be risk focused.
Mm-hmm.
So right now the system is very punishment focused,
Mm-hmm.
and that focus, frankly, is not smart. It tends to create more crime. And let me give you an example of that. You know, people who are using illegal substances, people who suffer from addiction, it is generally understood now that there are triggers for those uses. And some of those triggers are the people they're around, the places they're around, stressors in their life, trauma in their life. And so if you want someone who is suffering through substance use disorder
Mm-hmm.
to stop using substances, it would be a really bad idea to insert into their life trauma
Mm-hmm.
or stress that would cause them to feel like they have to use.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what happens if you take an addict and put them in a cage and put them in a jail cell. That is not a rehabilitative environment. It's an environment that exacerbates the very triggers that tend to cause people to use. And so if you're looking at creating outcomes to reduce the likelihood of drug use, those outcomes need to be crafted around access to services, referral to services, not sending people to the jail. Another sort of very simple example that is, I think, interesting is people steal from our ABC stores all the time. They steal liquor from our ABC stores. Virginia is one of the only places in the country where liquor sales are controlled by the government.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got this situation where people are going into an ABC, maybe they're stealing about $20 worth of liquor a day. Okay. You catch them, you incarcerate them. If you incarcerate them for even one day in the city of Richmond, the city of Richmond is going to pay $155+ per day to house them.
Wow.
And so you've got this approach to punishment that results in a loss of public funds in triplicate, right? Treble damages, essentially. And if you instead are thinking about managing risk, you can recognize, well, this is not behavior we want to see. It's nuisance behavior, but it's not behavior that we can't really manage in the community. And so we need to send this person to services and get them into AA and work on that, and actually reduce the likelihood of them abusing alcohol, while also reducing costs, because a lot of these public dollars that are spent on incarceration should really be spent on education and other vital city services. So those are just a couple examples of what I mean by getting smart on public safety.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's really important to utilize resources the best that we can and reducing as much cost while also getting the most benefit that we can with what we spend. And so, right now in Richmond, gun violence remains a pressing issue for many. Can you elaborate on your strategies to utilize Virginia's red safety laws and collaborate with community organizations to reduce gun violence, gun-related incidents?
Of course. So for folks who don't know, in the last few years, Virginia passed a couple of laws that are referred to generally as Virginia's red flag laws. But what they actually are laws about substantial risk orders and emergency substantial risk orders. And what these laws do is they empower a certain list of groups and individuals, including the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, to petition, to file a civil petition. It's not a criminal action. It's a civil petition to say, hey, this person poses a substantial risk to themselves or others by their possession of a firearm. And a judge will then order that person not to possess that firearm for a period of 6 months. That order can be renewed indefinitely, so long as the substantial risk is still present. And during that time, that order can be enforced through the execution of search warrants if necessary. And so there are really two major consistent repeat sources of homicides, especially gun homicides in the city. The first are, frankly, domestic abusers. And the second are young people with guns. Well, in both of these situations, we tend to know in advance that someone poses a substantial risk of danger with a firearm. In the case of domestic abusers, they're often coming in and out of the juvenile domestic relations court system on charges like domestic violence or strangulation or other things. And unfortunately, you've got oftentimes women in victim situations who just aren't ready or don't feel comfortable or empowered to prosecute those cases.
Yeah.
But they are able to and share that this person has access to a firearm or could have access to a firearm, and that they're concerned about that. We can work with those victims in those situations as the Commonwealth Attorney's Office to file these substantial risk orders, to throw a red flag, so to speak, on these situations, and obtain court orders that the domestic abuser cannot have access to firearms. We can do the same thing in the case of young people. Oftentimes you see when you've got younger people engaging in gun violence in the city, it's no secret that these parties are having these altercations in the lead up to it. Oftentimes you're seeing these young people post on social media threatening the other party, and sometimes even waving a gun around or referencing their access to firearms. And so we can do the same thing in those situations. We can throw a red flag. We can file a petition to have a judge deny them access to firearms. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that that's going to prevent every one of these, homicides. But I do think that a Commonwealth Attorney's Office has a responsibility to engage every potential tool to prevent gun violence. And when asked, what is this Commonwealth Attorney's Office doing to encourage the use of red flag laws in Richmond, the answer given by my opponent was, quote, honestly, nothing. Richmond just does not use this process at all. And I can't imagine looking a mother in the eyes who's lost their son and saying, we didn't do everything we possibly could to stop this. So I think my view is that that's a tool to do everything we possibly can to reduce gun violence, and especially those situations, and really any time that the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is on notice that someone does pose a substantial risk of danger by way of their possession of a firearm.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And yeah, I appreciate the initiative that you're going to be taking very soon, hopefully. And on that note of domestic abusers having access to these weapons, I know domestic abuse happens both with men and women, but is more prevalent in women. And so this just ties me over to reproductive rights, which we see are being attacked all over the country.
Yes.
And in states like Texas, where women,
Right.
well, doctors are being prosecuted for performing abortions, you've expressed opposition to prosecuting charges related to legislation that restrict reproductive rights. How do you see the role of the Commonwealth's attorney in safeguarding these rights amid evolving political landscapes?
So what folks should understand about the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is that this office has effectively constitutionally enshrined dictatorial control over individual cases.
Mhm.
They can decide whether to charge or not. They can decide what to charge or not. And they can decide whether to prosecute a case through to trial or to dismiss it. And nothing can be done about the decisions that they're making. There is no remedy for the decisions that they're making. It's full unilateral control over those decisions, which creates an opportunity and I think an obligation in this political environment for Commonwealth attorneys' offices to step up and say, I am not going to prosecute any attempt to criminalize access to abortion or reproductive rights.
Mhm.
I'm not going to prosecute any attempt to go backwards on LGBTQ rights or equality in the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do everything I can within my power to ensure that we don't have minor criminal offenses turn into deportations in an extreme federal immigration enforcement environment. So far, my opponent has not taken positions publicly on these issues, but I have, and that's how I feel about it. The Commonwealth Attorney's Office should not prosecute, and I would not prosecute any attempt to criminalize those situations.
Yeah, thank you for that. And
Mhm.
again, it's very important. There was just a trans woman who was arrested in Florida for using a bathroom. She was in there just to wash her hands, and
Mhm.
now she's could face up to a year, I think it is, in jail.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I know these issues are very salient right now and very important, especially to youth and marginalized communities.
Mhm.
And so just given the diverse backgrounds here in Richmond, how do you plan to engage with younger constituents and marginalized communities to ensure that our voices are also being represented in policies?
Honestly, doing outreach with younger populations is probably the most important thing.
Mhm.
Teachers, for example, don't think of themselves as crime fighters. They obviously think of themselves as educators. But by way of ensuring that a young child feels loved,
Mhm.
has access to quality education,
Mhm.
understands a pathway through life that hopefully includes a job that pays a living wage,
Mhm.
those actions tend to prevent crime.
Yeah.
They are crime fighters. And for the young people who are not getting that kind of attention, who are finding themselves in situations and making decisions that lead them into the criminal justice system, a lot of the work that needs to be done is to intervene with those young people early and essentially say, you are heading down a road that looks like separating yourself from really the best parts of life. I mean, once you've got a criminal conviction, especially a felony conviction, it's so much more difficult to get a job, to get housing, to get
Yeah.
education. And it almost walks you down a pathway of cycling through the system. And so,
Yeah.
to my point, the outreach for younger folks is incredibly important. It's something I would absolutely prioritize.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I listened to The Daily. It's another podcast where they were
Mhm.
talking about how when juveniles were sent to prison even for like a week,
Mhm.
that it completely transformed how everybody around them would perceive them and interact with them, and just had so many downsides. So yeah, I think it's really important to reach out to youth, especially to maintain public trust and productivity. And so transparency is obviously really important, especially in the justice system. And so what measures would you implement to ensure the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office operates with openness and maintains public trust?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've got a Commonwealth Attorney's Office right now that I think is having trouble with doing that.
Yeah.
You're seeing an office that is standoffish with regards to press relations or media relations, an office that's not really keeping the public up to date on serious issues in the city and what they're doing about it. And my view, again, is that the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is the chief public safety officer for the city, and as such has an obligation and a responsibility to educate the public about what is going on in terms of public safety in the city, especially when we have crucial cases like our general registrar misappropriating over $500,000 according to our inspector general, or a candidate in the 6th district for city council filing what appears to be fraudulent reports and effectively skewing that race in ways that remove the integrity from our election system. When you've got a homicide rate that's hovering around 50% clearance over the last 6 years, and you've got people effectively getting away with murder in the city, I think we need a Commonwealth Attorney's Office who's going to step up, own these problems, and say, here's what we're going to do about it. But what we get instead is essentially a bright line sort of policy around, oh, we're not going to talk to the press about this. Now, there is an ethical line around and a responsibility for prosecutors, especially, not to say things that could, for example, pose a substantial likelihood of tainting a jury process, right? But we report on allegations all the time, and as long as you are saying this is what we're alleging, and you're not saying, this person's absolutely guilty, right, and you're not taking a position on what the outcome should be, you can absolutely educate the public within that ethical constraint. And I think that needs to happen, because I think there's a lingering perception that Richmond's government is unfit or not doing the job it needs to be doing, and that Richmond's streets are unsafe. And part of the reason that perception exists is because we don't talk about the work that we're doing. And frankly, we're not doing some work that needs to get done.
Yeah, thank you for that. And transparency is very important, and being able to talk to the press is very important, because that's the way that we know what's going on in our city. So thank you for that. And so right now, in light of national conversations about systemic racism and inequality, how would your office work to address these issues within Richmond's legal system?
Two ways, really. I think one is making sure we are prioritizing recruitment of attorneys of color to do this work. Richmond has historically been, well, at least over the last few decades, a sort of majority minority city that is trending differently now, but really we have a significant minority population in the city, and we have a population in the justice system that is overrepresented by that group. And unfortunately, we've got a Commonwealth Attorney's Office and an office of 40 or so attorneys that only really has, off the top of my head, maybe 3 or 4 attorneys of color.
Wow.
And the part of the reason for that is, if you think about it, attorneys, people of color who have gotten to the point in their life where they've become attorneys and just have decided to focus their work in the criminal justice system are not natural prosecutors. They're natural defense attorneys. They're naturally thinking, how do I fight back against this? Or how do I make this better? and that our Commonwealth Attorney's Office can't, in a city of exceptional defense attorneys of color, recruit any of them to come work for it, I think is a clear sign that it's not an office that is prioritizing the reform work that needs to get done. So I think the first thing I would do is I would focus on building an office that would attract those attorneys and then actively recruiting them. I have committed, for example, to establishing the first deputy Commonwealth for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that matters. I think we need to build recruiting pipelines, especially in Virginia, where we've got some wonderful historically Black colleges, and also a law school, Howard. And so, like, we can do that work to recruit those voices and those perspectives into the office. And I think if we do that, we're going to be seen as an office that is more reflective of the diversity of the city and is inherently more representative and more fair to the folks who are moving through the system.
I love that. And I think that's really important, representation, and having people that are able to talk from experience and from these communities be able to have a place in the government to be able to help their communities and also help bring other perspectives to the table is very important. And so how do you envision the relationship between the Commonwealth Attorney's Office and local law agencies, law enforcement agencies, especially concerning accountability and community policing?
Sure. So, I think if you're prosecuting the right way, it's actually exceptionally lonely. And the reason is that you represent the Commonwealth as a Commonwealth. That means you represent the rule of law. You represent public safety. You don't really have clients. You don't represent the police as a client. You don't even represent the victims as a client. You represent the rule of law and you represent public safety insofar as you represent the Commonwealth as a whole.
Yeah.
And my point of view is that as a prosecutor, as a Commonwealth attorney, you need to be advocating for outcomes that tend to work for the whole community. And frankly, that tends to mean that people are disappointed on one side or the other.
Yeah.
Because compromise is necessary to get to places that are actually better for long-term public safety. Right now, there's sort of a cultural habit in this city in terms of how prosecutors and law enforcement work together, where prosecutors will, I think, in ways that are not democratic, cede their authority to local law enforcement and ask questions like, what do you want me to do with this case? Well, obviously, we need to be getting their input, just as we need to be getting the input of people who are victimized, right? But at the end of the day, that input needs to be a procedural justice of them being heard and incorporated in as much as insofar as it is possible to achieve an outcome that actually works to get accountability and reduce recidivism. But it can't be a menu. What would you like? Okay, then I'm going to do this. I think when Commonwealth attorneys' offices work well with law enforcement, essentially what law enforcement understands is that the Commonwealth attorney's office is a partner to public safety and the rule of law.
Yeah.
And when law enforcement is also focused on walking towards those two North Stars, it can look like a partnership.
Yeah.
It might not actually be one, but it looks like that. We're working together, right? But when you've got individual officers who veer off that course and they commit their own criminal acts, or they're violating the Constitution, or they are lying under oath, or they're in some other way not upholding the virtues of the rule of law or keeping people safe of public service, then the Commonwealth Attorney's Office has an obligation, just as they do with anyone who is breaking the law, to hold those police accountable. So that is my perspective, and that's how I would manage that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so you've advocated for addressing the root causes of crime. Can you discuss your views on alternative sentencing and restorative justice programs, and how might they be applied here in Richmond?
So I think sometimes the phrase restorative justice gets used in a way that is more broad than it really is. You know, restorative justice is a very specific tool. It is the notion that you can bring together a victim and an accused person, and with a neutral third party, you can have essentially a therapeutic conversation or exchange around what's happened, how it made every party feel, why it happened, and that you can get to a place where both victim and accused person have sort of gotten closure and healed, right? So it's a very specific therapeutic intervention into a criminal situation. It is absolutely an incredible practice when it can work, but you need buy-in. You need victims to say that they want to do that.
Yeah.
And think about how hard that is. I mean, you've been a victim, and now you're being asked to essentially relive that experience with the person accused of victimizing you. Not very many people want to sign up for that, understandably so. I think when there are people, and I've absolutely met them, who want to be a part of that process, it can be an incredible tool. But it is not a broader paradigm for alternative approaches to public safety. It's just one tool for that. So I think it is a useful tool. I think I think it's a challenging tool to use, but it's not a paradigm. It's not a scheme or broad way of how you do things. What I think the paradigm needs to be is accountability. Accountability not just for the individual act, right, repairing the instant harm, but accountability for violent risk. There are some people who, frankly, are simply too dangerous to be out with us for a number of reasons. And that dangerousness may not last forever, but it's certainly present for some period of time, either based on their age, their use of illegal substances, their mental health issues, which is so tragic. But like, there are some people who really are just so dangerous that they can't be out. Like, that's not a risk the community can be asked to bear. But the vast majority of people in the system don't pose those risks. So I think accountability is the paradigm. It has to be accountability that addresses the instant harm that's been done, and also manages violent risk, and also addresses and asks people to take accountability for their circumstances. You know, you can use the courtroom as an accountability mechanism, the prosecution as a mechanism for that, but people need to, if they've got a substance use disorder issue, they need to go check in with services. If they have a housing issue, there are people in the city who are working on those issues they can get help from. If they've got an issue with getting a job or getting certified to get a job, there are plenty of nonprofits that are working in the city on those issues. You know, we're very lucky in Richmond in that way. We're not out in an outlying jurisdiction where they don't have those things. But in Richmond, we have a lot of great nonprofits working on these issues. And I think accountability is really the paradigm, and alternatives, social services first should be sort of the standard practice rather than something we use in a minority of cases.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective, and that's very important. And so right now, Gen Z is in a very entering a very interesting political
Are
landscape.
you a Gen Zer?
Yes, I'm a Gen Zer.
I think I'm an upper limit millennial.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think I think Gen Z may not be that much. I think there's only one congressperson who's in the federal government right now.
Okay.
But I know that a lot of us are trying to get more involved with social justice
Mhm.
issues and be more involved with local politics. But some of us may not be, and some of us just may not know how. So how would you encourage Gen Z to become more involved in the electoral process and local governance?
Frankly, uh, you got to get involved early. I
Mhm.
wish I had gotten involved earlier.
Mhm.
I, I think it's kind of easy to grow up thinking that the problems that we see in the world are other people's problems.
Yeah.
Someone else is going to handle that. And let me tell you, they're not. You need to handle it. And
Mhm.
one way I think people can really get involved early is through their local Democratic committee. The Richmond City Democratic Committee is a great one. And, you can apply for membership and start going to meetings and learning more about these processes.
Yeah.
Frankly, the, you know, the group of people who move the city on policy is actually shockingly small
Mhm.
because it's the group of people who cares enough to consistently be working on these issues. And so if you get involved early, you'll meet these people, you'll know these people, you'll find opportunities to cooperate and work on really interesting problems with these people. And I think if you do that even for a little while, you'll find you'll probably do it forever.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, it is really important. And I had no idea about that committee that you could
Mhm.
join. I'll find that and put that in the link for this video.
Yeah.
And so before I ask you my final question, is there a final message you'd like to leave everybody with?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I thank you for the invitation. This has been a wonderful interview. The questions are extremely thoughtful, and I'm grateful to have been a part of this. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And so this is a question I ask all my guests.
Mhm.
And so if you could go back in time at any point in history, just as
Wow.
an observer, you couldn't change the future, where would you go and why?
Oh my gosh. Hmm. I think apropos of this conversation, I would like to go back to some of the earliest colonial criminal justice processes.
Mm,
And I think what I would find, because I've reviewed this history, is actually the origin of our criminal justice system is actually rooted in the church.
yeah.
And, that is where this notion, because you would have reverends who would also sit as judges,
Mm,
or you would have people sitting as judges who were, very involved in their local faith. And that's where you get this notion in the criminal justice system today that moral retribution is a positive thing, that that people should be punished. And this goes so far as our earliest that's where you get the word penitentiary. Like, a penitentiary is a prison. It's an institution that was actually brought about by the Quakers, and otherwise peaceful folk, who thought, what we should do with these people who are breaking the law? We should put them in cages and have them sit silently and do penance,
mm,
penitentiary.
wow.
And gosh, could you imagine the mental health problems that they sowed there, right? So I would like to go back and watch the origins of what's happening in our criminal justice system today. And I think if I were to do that and other people were to do that, you would say, wow, why are we still doing that today?
Yeah.
Why haven't we changed how we do this? Why are we continuing to tell ourselves stories about what works to keep people safe when really we should just be doing evidence driven things to do that?
Thank you. I love that answer. And I
Yeah.
think that is so true. So many laws and so
Mhm.
many regulations in this country kind of stem from that colonial period of
Mhm.
using religion as a means to, I guess, like figure out what's exactly right and what's exactly wrong.
Mhm.
And I'm assuming like a lot of states that ban alcohol sales on Sunday a lot of that's originating from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely need to, like you said, use evidence-based approaches to addressing these issues, especially in our new era. We're in the 21st century.
Right.
And so I think our law should reflect the progress that we've made as society. And so I thank you again for coming on. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And I'll link the page to your website so people can go check it out. And I wish you luck on this race.
Please. And I will just say, I don't know what UR is doing in its journalism program, but this was wonderful. I've done a lot of interviews. This was really thoughtful.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
This is great.
Awesome. Well, tune in next week, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.